song, I Stand Amazed in the Presence, thinking of the presence of God, his nearness, as we heard about even today, that if you're a child of God, that God owns you, that we belong to God. But the amazing thing about his presence, his nearness to us. So let's stand together. We'll sing, I Stand Amazed in the Presence. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned on verse 2. For me it was in the garden, he prayed not my will but thine. He had no tears for his own griefs, but sweat drops of blood for mine. How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. He took my sins and my sorrows, he made them his very own. He bore the burden to Calvary and suffered and died alone. When with the ransomed in glory, his face I at last shall see, 'twill be my joy through the ages to sing of his love for me. How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. You may have a seat.
Welcome back. Trust you had a good afternoon. So just remember a couple of things for this week. Obviously, a big thing is remember the Big Bear Day Camp on Friday. And so we'd love to have you join us for as much or a little of the days you're able to do. So Ben gave a good advertisement this morning. And so sign up online. We really need to know who's coming so that we have the right amount of food. So if you got any questions about that, talk to Ben or Pastor Tim or myself. I hope you'll come out. And then remember as well, next Sunday, Dan Eads will be here. And looking forward to having Dan. And so he will be doing his ministry presentation in the evening service next week. And so we're also having a nacho night when he's done with that. So remember that for next Sunday. Should be a good time with him. Looking forward to hearing what God's doing, and you'll be encouraged by Dan's ministry. We'll give you it's been a few weeks since we've taken prayer requests. So here in a moment, if you've got some sort of prayer request you'd like to share or something you're grateful for, we really like to hear that too. So we'll give you a chance here in a minute. Just one thing I'll mention is pray for Kathy McCutcheon. So that would be Melissa Batchman's grandmother and Brittany Crothers' grandmother. And then you can figure out all the other connections with great-grandkids and all that. So pray for her. She's really just had a hard time physically. I think this spring they found a cracked vertebrae in her back, and she's been wearing this brace. And then they found two more. So she's had two more break since then. So got to stop by and see her, I think on Thursday. And she's just in a lot of pain. So we want to pray for that. I think it'd be good to pray for, and we are going to do prayer groups here in a minute. So be good to pray for everyone affected by the flood in Texas. I mean, just a horrible, horrible circumstance there with that, especially the Christian camp, where I don't even know for sure, at least a couple dozen kids were swept away in the flood. So really, really tragic situation there. And So pray for all the families involved. I saw this afternoon that the camp director died trying to rescue people as well. So just a horrible, horrible situation there. Anyone have any prayer requests you'd like to share or anything you're grateful for? Yeah, Becky? Okay. So Riley is getting her tonsils and adenoids out. All right. Anything else that you have? Yeah, Dan. Daniel. Okay. I didn't hear the end of what you said. You said he's not doing well physically or Parkinson's. Okay. What's his name? What is it? Keith. So pray for Keith, their friend who's got Parkinson's. All right. Anything else that we can pray for? Yeah, Joe? Is there something with their daughter or yeah, pray for Tori? Yeah. Yeah, they're up in Mammoth, I think, this weekend. Um, yeah, she's the one with the brain tumor. Yeah. Yeah. Good to not just forget about that. It's an ongoing challenge for them. I mentioned this morning the McCartneys had their baby, I think, yesterday morning. So pray for them as they adjust. And it sounds like everything went well. There were some concerns because she had a C-section the last time, just with complications, and they're all the way out at Fort Irwin, so they are not close to a major hospital. But everything went well, and so praise the Lord with them for that. All right, we'll find a handful of people, 3-4 people around you, a couple more if you want, and just take a couple minutes to pray for that. And if you got something else that you've got a burden on your heart that you didn't feel like sharing publicly, but you want to share with your little prayer group, that'd be awesome. And we'll take a few minutes to pray before we sing a couple more songs.
Sing a couple more songs before Pastor Kit comes. The first one is Jesus Shall Reign. And I was thinking, as you read news events, world events, and even just some of the chaos that it seems like happening in our world and in our day, it's so encouraging to know that God is in control and that one day he will send Jesus, that he will come and fix all evil. And just what a hope that is for those of us who are in Christ. That Jesus shall reign. So we'll sing Jesus shall reign, and then Yet Not I. Let's stand, and we'll sing. Jesus shall reign where'er the sun does its successive journeys run. His kingdom spread from shore to shore, till moon shall wax and wane no more. He shall reign in glory, crowned with grace and might. Bless his name and praise the sovereign King. He shall reign forever with his chosen bride. All the earth shall sing that Jesus is the King. People and realms of every tongue dwell on his love with sweetest song, and infant voices shall proclaim their earthly blessings on his name. He shall reign in glory, crowned with grace and might. Bless his name and praise the sovereign King. He shall reign forever with his chosen bride. All the earth shall sing that Jesus is the King. Let every creature rise and bring honor and glory to our King. Angels descend with songs again, and earth repeat the loud amen. He shall reign in glory, crowned with grace and might. Bless his name and praise the sovereign King. He shall reign forever with his chosen bride. All the earth shall sing that Jesus is the King. What gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer? There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, for my life is wholly bound to his. Oh, how strange and divine, I can sing all is mine, yet not I, but through Christ in me. The night is dark and I am not forsaken, for by my side the Savior, he will stay. I labor on in weakness and rejoicing, for in my need his power is displayed. To this I hold, my shepherd will defend me. Through the deepest valley he will lead. Oh, the I dread, I know I am forgiven. The future sure, the price it has been paid. For Jesus bled and suffered for my pardon, and he was raised to overthrow the grave. To this I hold, my sin has been defeated. Jesus now and ever is my plea. Oh, the chains are released, I can sing, I am free, yet not I, but through Christ in me. With every breath I long to follow Jesus, for he has said that he will bring me home, and day by day I know he will renew me, until I stand with joy before the throne. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. All the glory evermore to him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. Amen. Great singing. Please have a seat.
Well, good evening. Of course, we're back inside. We had fun outside last Wednesday while our building smelled like a dead cat, and glad that that's over. That was interesting, and I think it's a little bit warmer tonight than it was last week as well. So, yeah, Ron's got his coat on. So, I had nothing to do with the temperature tonight. So, anyway, I think it feels pretty good. Well, we're going to talk about authority and submission this evening. Hopefully, kids, you got all you have the red paper. If not, there are more copies of it back there, and we've got candy up here, so we are all set on that front. We're going to talk some more tonight about authority and submission. You know, that's an important topic. I think it's interesting to think about. We don't necessarily think about authority and submission a whole lot, but think about the fact that Ephesians, really from the middle of Ephesians 5 all the way through the middle of chapter 6, is completely dedicated to authority-submission relationships. Colossians 3 does the same thing, talks about those same relationships. Husband, wife, slave master, slave, children, parents. And as well, 1 Peter 2 through into chapter 3, again, gives a really long section to that epistle to talk about authority and submission relationships. And so you've got 3 epistles that give significant attention to various relationships of authority and submission. You could really add to that Romans chapter 13 talks about submission to government at length. And there's probably others. You know, Jesus talks a lot about authority and submission, specifically with the government and other things. And so it is a very important biblical subject. And so I think in particular it should be striking to us that 3 of the epistles give extended length, extended focus in discussing the will of God, how we obey God's will, to how we relate to authority. So last week, we talked specifically about submission. How is it that you submit to authority? Now, anytime you talk about submission to authority, the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is what are the exceptions, right? Because we like the exceptions when we're talking about submission, all right? And so when is it right to disobey? When is it right to resist the authority? Came up, I think, in a couple of the questions during the service last week, and then had a couple of questions afterwards about it as well. And I originally was planning to start off tonight by talking about when is it appropriate to disobey an authority. But as I thought about some more, as I did some more reading this week, I decided that it would be best to hold off until we have a really good understanding of authority before we talk about submission. So I think if we understand what makes a good authority and what authority really is, well, we have to understand that well to understand when it is correct, when it is appropriate for you to resist the authority. So we'll come back to when is it right to disobey an authority after. It's going to be a while because I'm not doing another Sunday night here for several weeks. So we'll get to it eventually. So tonight, I want to talk about attributes of godly authority. What makes a good authority? Now, I'm going to ask you here in a moment to tell me, what is a characteristic, an attribute of a godly authority? And I'd like you to think about that and give me some feedback here in a moment. But before I take your answers, I want to, again, just clarify, like I did last week, that there is a difference between an authority and a leader. All right? Because there are lots of, and particularly we live in a world with all sorts of very influential people online. You can find, all sorts of really good influencers. I mean, influencer is now a profession, right? I was listening to a podcast this week that, among young people, teenagers, one of the most, what do you want to do when you grow up? Be an influencer is like towards the very top of ambitions of young people, which is really kind of sad to think about. But everyone wants to be an online personality. You can make money being an online influencer and personality. But anyway, even beyond that, there are all sorts of influential pastors, theologians. There are influential voices on the internet about politics. It's not just them. Kids. There are cool kids at school that are more, that are easier to listen to than your parents. And so there's all sorts of people out there that are influential. And so a great leader is gravitating. A great leader inspires people to follow. There are very brilliant, intelligent, well-spoken, sharp people out there. But it's important to remember that you are not obligated to obey any of them. You're not obligated to obey any of them. Because there's a difference between leadership and authority. God does not tell you to obey every influential person. So kids, there might be a kid at school, this is probably more a teenager thing than a younger one, but there might be someone at school that you trust more than you do your parents. You may think they have things figured out better than your parents. Now, I'm almost certain that they don't. But you are called by God to obey your parents. You're not called to give that same submission to anyone else. And the same would go in every level that we are, authority comes from God. Authority is rooted in a God-ordained office. So the Bible, Ephesians talks about husbands. It talks about parents. In that context, it talks about slave masters even. Peter talks about the government. He talks about parents. He talks about, he talks about husbands. He talks about church, things of that nature. And Colossians, a lot the same. So God has prescribed certain authorities that you are responsible to obey. So that said, authority and leadership are not the same. Now, ideally, authorities have good leadership qualities, right? You hope that your authorities are also good leaders. It stinks when your authorities are stinky leaders. They can't articulate themselves. They're not very wise. So ideally, they go together, but they are not the same. So we are not talking tonight so much about leadership qualities. We're talking about what makes a good authority. But obviously, there's lots of carryover. So you don't have to think too hard about the distinction. So you tell me, what makes a godly authority? Gracie? All right. Patience and self-control. Excellent. Yeah. You don't want an authority that is impulsive, right? That's kind of a scary thing. What else? Ben? Hmm. Good. So very biblical. That's good. Esther? Okay, willing to serve. He, doesn't just see himself as receiving all the service. He views himself as servant. Excellent. What else? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Submitted to the Word of God. Excellent. Yeah, Sarah? Okay. Expertise. Yeah. It's, you want an authority that knows what they're talking about, right? That's really good. And so an authority ought to cultivate wisdom and understanding. They should be making, not just, again, making impulsive decisions, but seeking to discern the will of God. Good. Elizabeth? What's that? Say it again. Humility. Humility. Yep, I'm getting a little deaf. Yeah, humility. All right. Can you expand? Like in what sense of humility? I'm putting you on the spot. Like, can you expand on how they should be humble? Okay. Yeah, good. Arrogant. Yeah.
I wrote a book years ago entitled Humility and How I Obtained It, $50 for autograph copies.
There you go. Yep. Amen. Well, I'll give you $5 for it. So, Dr. Brock? Okay. Communicate with clarity. Yeah. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. Good. Joe? Okay. Yeah. Good ability to listen. I think tied to that, collaborate with people around you. Good. Yeah, Lyndon? Truthful. Yeah, you want an honest authority. That is a good one. That's big. Yeah, there's lots of things, and again, I've been working as I'm putting the series together. I'm working largely off of Jonathan Leeman's book on authority. He gives 5 attributes of godly authority, and we're going to try and cover 2 of them tonight. So we will come back to the others in a few weeks. But the first one, and let me say this too before we move on. Some of you might think, kids, you might think, well, I'm not an authority, so I'm free tonight. Like, none of this applies to me. Pastor's not going to get on my case because I'm not an authority. I think it's good to say that all of us need to have a good view of what a good authority is. Now, first of all, kids, someday you will be an authority yourself. Lord willing, in some sense. Boys, hopefully someday you're a husband and you need to know how to be a good husband someday. And various, in other sets, girls, someday you're going to marry a man. And you want to marry a man who will be a good authority in your life. Maybe someday, hopefully this never happens, but maybe someday you've got to look for a church. Or maybe someday, maybe I just kick the bucket and the Life Point's got to look for a pastor. Well, you need to know what to look for in a pastor or in a church. So there's lots of context where your sense of what makes a good authority is really important. And all of us are probably, especially maybe not so much some of the younger kids, but authority is a regular part of our life. So this is important for all of us. All right, so that said, the first characteristic of a good, godly authority is that a godly authority is accountable to authority themselves. A good authority, a godly authority, is accountable to authority. Now, that's important, and obviously it's very different from how our world is. So our world is littered with bad authorities. And it's because we keep putting people in authority who lust after authority. They love to be in charge. They're grasping for power. You know, Jesus said in Mark 10, verse 42, you know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. And the idea there is do so oppressively. And their great men exercise authority over them. And so Jesus points out that in the world, to be an authority is to domineer. It's to grab all the authority you can, to be egotistical. And an egotistical person who loves to be in control of everything never ends well for those who are under him. No, instead, a leader should aspire to be like Jesus, who said later in the same passage, even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. So we want to promote authorities who are like Jesus. And more to the point about authority, consider what Jesus said about himself in John 5, verse 19. Jesus said, truly, truly, I say to you, the Son of Man can do nothing of himself unless it is something he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, these things the Son also does in like manner. Now, that is an incredible statement coming from infinite God, right? I mean, here's Jesus. He is infinite in knowledge, infinite in power, infinite in understanding, and yet he emphasizes here his submission to the Father's will. So, if you want to be a godly authority, embrace accountability. Now I'll ask you this. Why is it that a godly authority welcomes accountability? Why does a godly authority welcome accountability? Maybe he doesn't need accountability. Yeah, Pastor Tim? Okay. Yeah, it's a good check. All right, good. Why does a good, godly authority welcome accountability? Felicia? Okay, good. Because he is under authority, right? Now, he may not see it that way, but he is under authority. All right? And he wants to please the Lord. Good. Anything else there? I mean, fundamental. I mean, we're under authority, and as well, we are sinners, right? So, a couple of ideas here. Jonathan Leeman points out, for one, that godly authorities welcome accountability because human authority exists to teach people about God and to promote righteousness and truth. And this is an interesting one to think about a bit. That Jesus said that most human authorities strive to serve themselves. Right? I mean, you think of like world leaders, people who thirst after authority. They do it because they want power and because they want to serve themselves. And without God, what else is there an authority to pursue other than himself? And so, but authority structures, and if that's the case, authority structures become nothing but a competition for power. And authorities can do whatever serves themselves. And so, Jonathan Leeman points out that if there is no God, if there is no ultimate truth, then authority really is about a fight for power. And that's why, you look at Marxism, for example, communism. Marxism is built on the assumption that there is no God. And so the whole system is built on revolution. There's oppressors and there's the oppressed, and the oppressed are constantly trying to revolt against the oppressors. Because all it is a grasping for power. But as Christians, we think of authority very differently. Jonathan Leeman says, if there are values and truths and meanings we wish to protect and uphold, then authority must exist. We have rules about stealing because property is valuable. We outlaw murder because human life is precious. We restrict physical intimacy to marriage because the union of a man and woman is precious. I think that's really insightful. That godly authority is always about something much bigger than the authority himself. You know, if you are a husband in your home, you are to lead your family not for yourself, but because of something bigger than you. You are in pursuit of truth and righteousness. As a pastor here at Life Point, I mean, this should be the most obvious place that a pastoral authority, or as well would be true of congregational authority. It is not an end in itself. It serves something bigger. And so, why does a local church have authority? Well, Paul says in 1 Timothy 3:15 that the church is the pillar and support of the truth. So God gave the congregation authority so that we could support the truth, so that we could uphold orthodox doctrine. That's why we practice church discipline, to uphold orthodox doctrine and the morals of Scripture, because those things matter. Similarly, God gave pastors authority, not so that we can gloat and just get what we want, but what does Hebrews 13:17 say? It says, obey your leaders and submit to them, talking there about pastors, for they keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with grief, for this would be unprofitable to you. So, there you see, first of all, as a pastor, I am under the authority. I'm going to give an account to God someday for how I use my authority. But one of the things that God is going to hold me accountable for is that I am pushing you towards truth and preparing you to stand before the Lord yourself. So if you have authority, remember that your authority is not an end in itself. God gives you authority to point people to God, to uphold truth and righteousness. That's really important. Second reason why it's important that authorities are accountable authorities, because every human authority is a steward of God's authority. Every human authority is a steward of God's authority. All right, so your authority is not fundamentally in you. Husbands, your authority is not fundamentally in you, it's from God. As pastors or a church, or if you have employees at work, your authority does not ultimately derive from you, it derives from God. And so we see that at various places in Scripture. So Romans 13:1 says, every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities. Why? It's talking there about the government. For there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. So the government, the king, Paul's under Caesar, and he's saying here that Caesar is not autonomous. He is under God's authority. Of course, in the United States, our leaders are also under the citizens' authority because we elect them. All right? The same goes for a husband. You see that there in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 3. I want you to understand that Christ is the head of every man, and the man is the head of a woman, and God is the head of Christ. So husbands, you are not an ultimate authority in your home. You do not have carte blanche authority over your family. You rule under the Lord. We are stewards. We are stewards of God's authority. So, Life Point does not belong to me. It belongs to God. 1 Peter 5, Jesus says that when the chief shepherd appears, I will be accountable to the chief shepherd. Husbands, your family is not yours. It is the Lord's. It is a stewardship to Him. On and on we can go. Even, if there's any relationship in humanity that we would think would be characterized by complete ownership, it would be slave-master. All right, that's how, Christians shouldn't think that way, but the world would think that way. But, Paul says in Ephesians 6:9, masters, do the same things to them, speaking of their slaves, and give up threatening, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. So, I mean, we don't have a problem with this, but imagine in the ancient world, if you're a slave master, I mean, you think, these are my slaves. I can do with them whatever I want. And we're not going to get into we don't need to get into deep debate tonight about slavery and all the difficulties with that. But I mean, isn't it interesting there that Paul, he puts these slave masters in their place and says, look, buddy, remember that you have a master in heaven. And it's not just that you have a master in heaven. He says your slaves ultimately belong to the Lord too. And so all of us are under authority. So because of that, I mean, someone asked afterwards last week if there's ever a time when you should obey an authority who commands you to sin. And the simple answer is no. No. Because for an authority to claim that you should obey them in sinning is to defy the very nature of what their authority is. A human authority is a steward of God's authority. And so the moment that a human authority would claim the ultimate right to say, you must obey me in defiance of God, they have forgotten who they are and what their role is. They are stewards of the Lord's authority. And so we have to understand that. And I think, it's very easy, and of course God understands that as authorities, it's easy for us to get a big head. It's easy for us to begin to think, man, I'm big stuff. I'm in charge. I've got power, right? I think it's interesting, building off of that God knew that Israel's kings would struggle with beginning to think that they had ultimate authority. And so in Deuteronomy, now this is before Israel had any sort of kings, but God knew eventually Israel would have kings. And so Moses said to them, he said, now it should come about, he talks about the fact that someday you're going to have kings in Israel, and he says, now it should come about when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. Now that's a fairly long homework assignment, right? Write the whole law on a scroll in the presence of the priest. It shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by carefully observing all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or to the left, so that he and his sons may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel. I think that's just a really fascinating discipline that God put into every king's life. Now, I don't know, the books of the 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles don't tell us if any of the kings actually did this. All right? But this is what they're supposed to do. The moment you become king, you're supposed to start making your own handwritten copy of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then, God says, you are supposed to keep it with you throughout your entire reign, and you are to read from it every day. And what is God doing for those kings? He is giving them a discipline to remember, buddy, you are not ultimately in charge. You are under my authority, and you must obey me. And so God wanted those kings to understand that very, very clearly. And I think that routine is essential because leaders very easily begin to believe in their own legend. We like to begin to think that we're pretty smart, that we really are powerful, that we have it together, and that can happen at every level, right? I mean, you go to a 10-year-old basketball game. And there's this kid. I mean, he makes a shot, and he's running down the court, and he's backing up. He's got his fingers in the air letting you know that he is on fire, and he's playing basketball against a bunch of kids who are under 5 feet tall. He's not a big deal, right? Like, you put him on a court with adult men, he's going to get crushed. But since he's playing against a bunch of 8-year-olds, he thinks he's big stuff. And it happens to all of us. We all easily begin to think that we are big stuff. Jonathan Lehman talks in his book about a friend who had been on the staff of a major megachurch pastor. He doesn't give the guy's name. But, this pastor is pastoring a huge church, and his friend said to him, I don't think I've got this quote. I don't have this quote in there. But his friend said, this pastor doesn't welcome or invite questions or critique. Just the opposite, you walk around on eggshells because you know you'll get yelled at, mocked, or fired. There was a culture of fear, and in such environment, you're trained to be more loyal to the person than to the Lord. I think that's really, there's a good warning there. Beware, first of all, if you are in leadership, if you ever begin to set yourself up and demand a loyalty that rivals God, you are in a dangerous place. And if you ever find yourself under a leader who begins to exalt himself or exalt his authority to the place of God, it's time to find a new authority. He talks here about a megachurch pastor. It happens a lot. We could tell stories for a long time of megachurch pastors. These guys that they build these massive ministries, and it's all built around them and their personality, and then they get fired. They get fired. So Mark Driscoll got fired. Darren Patrick was a big one in St. Louis. We'd go down the line of these guys. They begin to really think they're big stuff. They begin to be very abusive and wicked in how they lead their staff, and they lose sight of their place under God. So Lehman says, loyalty to a leader is a good thing, but good loyalty is loyalty to his leadership under God and anyone else whom God has placed him, like fellow elders or a congregation. Good loyalty says, I'm committed to you and your success as a leader, and that means I cannot follow you into folly or unrighteousness because it's bad for both you and us. I think that's good. So I'll say to you as your pastor, don't ever follow me into sin. All right? Don't. And if I ever ask you to, you call me out. All right? And if I don't respond, that's when you fire me. All right? Husbands, dads, same to you. Don't you ever command people to sin. You want to make it clear at all times to those who are following you that you are under authority yourself, that you are accountable to God. That needs to be very evident, not just in what you say you believe, but in how you actually live and lead those who are under your authority. And I'd say to you as well that if you're under authority, that you want to encourage that, foster that in those that you are under. That you want to encourage them. Not in a demeaning way, but in how you submit, that you are encouraging them to be under God. So in sum, a godly authority always sees himself as accountable. And so, here's a couple more applications. If you're ever on a pulpit committee, all right, or someday, you're in a church is looking for a new pastor, I guarantee you'll get an application, you'll get a resume from someone who is not a member of a local church. There's lots of pastors out there that are not a part of a local church. They're not members anywhere. Don't hire that guy. Don't hire that guy. Doesn't matter how talented he is. Doesn't matter how charismatic he is. Doesn't matter how cool his resume is, how great of a preacher he is. A man who will not put himself under the authority of a local church is going to be a bad pastor. I promise you. And they're everywhere, right? They're everywhere. Guys walk around and I'm a pastor, and they're not tied to a church. They're not going to be good leaders. Girls, all right? Talking to the younger girls here in particular, or any single ladies, I suppose. Someday you may be really attracted to a man who's got a rebel personality. He's exciting. He's fun. And he's got a, kind of that edge to him that no one's going to tell him what to do. Don't marry a guy who revels in being a rebel. Because courage and confidence are a good thing in a man. But a man who can't submit to authority will not lead you or your family well. He won't. Now, because if he can't function on a team, he's not going to be a good leader of your team as a family. Parents, if you want your kids to grow into strong leaders someday, and we ought to want that for all of them, especially our boys. If you want them to grow into strong leaders someday, then the best thing you can teach them is how to submit. How to submit based on genuine heart convictions about the truth of God. So it is vital to leadership development that we learn how to be under authority. So, good leaders are under authority. All right, second, any questions, comments with that before we go on? I'm just kind of plowing. James? To go up a step. Yeah, or to encourage something. If you're promoting something, it's like an advertisement. Or if you're promoted, that means you get a higher position. Yeah. All right. Anything else there? All right. Well, we're going to cover one more attribute tonight of godly authority. Godly authority fosters life. Godly authority fosters life. Now, on Father's Day, I preached a Father's Day sermon, and we talked some about the manosphere. And maybe you remember that a couple weeks ago. So, and Will Spencer said, men of the manosphere trained to grow into physical, financial, and sexual power. The promise is that by shedding beta, I don't think I put this quote up here. Nope. The promise is that by shedding beta programming and becoming alphas, the men will transform into objects of women's sexual desire. This will activate dormant feminine submission, empowering men to triumph over the feminist spirit of the age. So, we talked about this on Father's Day, that there's this view of manhood that is very prevalent, especially among younger guys today, that manhood really is about the pursuit of power. Like if you assert yourself as a strong man, then you will bring out of women in particular a submission to your power. All right? And that's really what it's, and it ends, really it is submission to your power as a man for selfish ends. All right? Because, Andrew Tate, one of the guys that is most associated with the manosphere, he brags about his raping of women. He is a wicked man, so it is not the pursuit of power for the good of those under you. It is a pursuit of power to yourself, to your own selfish ends. But that is very different from what we see out of God and how God uses authority. So Genesis 1:28 says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Now you see two things there about God that are really important about how it is that you exercise authority. First of all, when God created humanity, he did not consolidate authority, he passed it out. The first thing he did when he created Adam and Eve was he gave them authority over all of creation. So God's not trying to squeeze all the authority around himself. He's passing out authority. That's what a good authority does. And as well, God told mankind to subdue creation, but he didn't mean by that he was to abuse it. Because in chapter 2, he tells Adam to till the earth. He's to subdue the creation by making all of creation fruitful, right? He's to cultivate life in the creation that he has made. So, let's talk about two ideas here. First of all, good authority gives life. Good authority gives life to those under it, all right? Let's use a dumb illustration here, all right? Probably most of you at some point in your life have seen The Lion King, all right? And let's talk about Mufasa and Scar, right? Mufasa and Scar as leaders, all right? If you haven't seen Lion King, I apologize. But we got a lot of kids in the room, so Mufasa sees his role as the king of the jungle. It's not really a jungle, it's more like I don't know what it is. The plains. King of the plains. Yeah, whatever it is. So Mufasa sees his job as the king as being to keep balance, right? To make all of the kingdom thrive, right? To keep the order in place so that all the animals are doing well, the environment's doing well, and as everyone thrives, he thrives, all right? And then Scar, kills his brother and he becomes the king, all right? And what does, Scar subscribes to the manosphere philosophy of authority, right? Because he is, first of all, he is an insecure lion, all right, not a person. He's an insecure lion with a thirst for power, greedy thirst for power. And so he does not foster life in the kingdom. He squeezes it out because of his insecure thirst to serve himself. You could think, as well, consider the contrast between what the curse, what Satan has done to creation, and what God is going to do in Revelation 21 and 22. Satan's selfish quest for power has brought grief and misery and death to everything in our world. But someday, when Jesus reigns over the world, he is going to foster life. Right? I mean, all of creation is going to thrive under his authority. So, men, we talked on Father's Day about the fact that our world is beating men down, but you won't find true joy sucking authority and power and life to yourself. You will find joy by leading those under you to life. Think about, for husbands here specifically, Ephesians 5:28 and 29 say, "So husbands also to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church." So, again, I mean, you take the Andrew Tate manosphere view of how a man is an authority over a woman, and you look at what God says here in Ephesians 5:28 and 29, they couldn't be any more different. That a husband needs to have a vision of where his family needs to go, right? We talked about, that authority is in pursuit of truth, righteousness, and the ultimate goodness and glory of God. So a godly husband has a vision of where his family needs to go. But he doesn't get there by grabbing all the life and authority and bringing it to himself. He serves himself by nourishing and cherishing and bringing life to his wife and to his entire family. So as your wife and children thrive, so will you. So men, lead your home, but lead it with the goal of seeing everyone reach their highest potential and conform to God's will. Promote life. Don't squeeze it out. I think we've got people in this room who are in leadership positions here at Life Point, all right? And so if you're in a leadership position here at Life Point, you have a goal in your leadership. If Nathan's in charge of the ushers, right? So, Pastor Tim's in charge of musicians. I'm in charge of different things. We've got different people in charge of ministry here at the church. And it's easy as a ministry leader to focus on the task. We've got to get X done. And I hope that if you're in charge of a ministry here at Life Point, that you love the task that God has given us to do, whatever it might be, all right? It matters. But we also always have to understand that if that task is going to be accomplished well, it's going to be accomplished well as the people who are serving under us are thriving themselves. That we want to foster life and encouragement and vitality in those who are working under us. And I think that's true across the board as a church. The church will not thrive as everything, crashes smaller and smaller into a few people. It thrives as everyone is healthy. which brings to second point here. Good authority passes out authority. Good authority passes out authority. Now, once again, if you are an insecure, arrogant, narcissistic leader, then you're going to pull all the authority into yourself, right? I'm the only one that can do it right. I'm the smartest guy in the room. I'm the only one that's capable. I'm going to get all the glory. And so a bad authority pulls all that authority to themselves. And they don't trust anyone except themselves. They see themselves as superior, and they demand absolute control. But Jesus, in contrast, spent massive amounts of time building his disciples into great authorities. Now think about that. I mean, one of Jesus' primary works during his 3-year ministry was to distribute authority, to equip these other men to take over for him, to be the men who would ultimately found the church. And, Paul told Timothy to do the same thing. He said in 2 Timothy 2:2, the things which you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, and trust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And so a good authority is always passing out authority. He is not pulling all the authority into one spot. He's working to pass it out. This passage is interesting. This is David talking about God and how God distributes authority. He says, the God who girds me with strength and makes my way blameless. He makes my feet like hinds' feet and sets me upon my high places. He trains my hands for battle so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. You have also given me the shield of your salvation, and your right hand upholds me, and your gentleness makes me great. That last line, I think, is particularly cool. Your gentleness makes me great. That God, again, an insecure leader doesn't want anyone to be great but himself. And that's not how God is, right? God's passion is to make us great. Now, obviously not great in the same way that God is great. But God is at work to strengthen us, to empower us to do great things for his will. So, in that vein, a godly husband doesn't cultivate a selfish dependence in his wife on himself, where she can't think for herself, where he micromanages every part of her life. No, he equips her to be strong, to go out, and he gives her room as well to use the authority that he gives her. A godly parent does the same with your children. Those of us who are parenting our kids, it's easy to just do it all myself, make all the decisions. It's easier, it's simpler, a lot of times in the short term, to just pull all the authority to yourself. But if you're a parent, your goal really should be to distribute authority, to prepare your children for independence. And so work in that direction. Work to pass out authority, not to bring it all in. A good boss empowers his employees to expand their abilities. Now, obviously, if you're running McDonald's, McDonald's just wants a whole lot of people who can put ketchup on a burger really fast. And you got an assembly line to make burgers, all right? And that works for McDonald's. It doesn't work in a lot of contexts, right? So if you are an employer, you want to train people to work well. A good pastor trains other leaders. A good ministry leader. If you've got a ministry at church, I think a good ambition would be that every minister of God should be working to work himself out of a job. Everyone in ministry should be trying to work yourself out of a job in the sense that you are bringing up someone behind you who can take your job. That should always be our goal. Parents, think the same way. Now, there's an end date on your authority over your kids, right, when they graduate and move out of the house. but you're trying to work yourself out of a job. You're trying to get them to adulthood so that you don't have a job anymore because they're ready to do it themselves. At every level, a good authority passes out authority. He is working himself out of a job. So, those are two qualities. Any questions, comments before we wrap up tonight? All right. We're going to pray, and then we need to do our follow-up on our quick little business meeting from our conversation last week. So, I forgot to tell our secretary about that, so we need to take some notes on that real quick. But let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for who you are and for what you have done. And Lord, thank you for your grace and mercy to us. Lord, help those of us who are in authority to be good authorities. Help those who are under authority to support good authorities over them. God, I pray for our children. I pray especially for our boys that they would grow up to be strong leaders who will be good authorities in their homes, in the church, in their workplace. I pray that our girls would build those qualities also. And Lord, I pray that we would honor you in how we exercise authority.